See that lone pine up on that hill over there? What are we actually doing right now? The kids are just wild out there. They're wild. But they're having a good time, you know? They're having a good time. This is Untamed Unbroken, the Adventurer's Guide, and I'm your host, Blake Bredesen. Welcome back to Untamed Unbroken. Today we are talking solo camping versus group camping. We're going to go through a little comparison here. We'll talk pros and cons of each. We'll talk about some tips, safety measures, and kind of what to expect comparing one to the other to help you gear up for either one. Kind of meant to be I feel like a lot of people have been on group camping trips before, unless you're brand new to camping. But you might be brand new to camping and you want to go on a solo trip for your first time. Your first time camping could be a solo trip. So just help you kind of figure out what to expect and the differences between them. Let's start with solo camping first. And we'll go through some of the benefits or the pros, if you will, to solo camping. Number one, self-reliance, independence. You're out there on your own. You're going to build confidence. You're going to build some skills. You're going to learn a little bit about yourself. You're going to learn who you are. You're going to problem solve. It's all on you. So you're facing, overcoming challenges on your own can be super satisfying, and it will build that confidence. The skill building side, you're going to be forced to do everything on your own. So, setting up camp, you're going to learn how to cook, or at least not how to cook. Navigating, it's going to force you to develop and rely on your outdoor skills. You're going to sit there and you're going to have time also to develop some of these skills. Maybe things like knot tying. Maybe it's you've never fished before and you're getting into that. And so you're going to have time to do these things. Number two, it's going to give you flexibility and freedom. You have complete control over your day, your weekend, your trip. So you decide when you wake up. You decide when you want to go on a hike. You decide how long you're going to stay at a certain spot. Maybe that lunch spot you're sitting at is super nice and you want to stay for a little while longer. And you don't have to run it by anybody. You're just on your own. And that also leads to spontaneity. You can change your plans at any time. You can go explore off trail, stay longer, stay shorter. It's up to you. Number three, it's going to give that kind of solitude and reflection, nature immersion, mental clarity. You're going to really have a lot of time to think. You're just out there, nature and your thoughts, which can be very therapeutic. It can clear the mind. It can clear that brain fog and allow for some reflection on yourself. If that's what you're there for or not, it's going to happen. And then the immersion, without distractions, you immerse yourself in the sounds, the sights, the smells. You become more in tune and more aware of your surroundings. And so those are kind of the big pros, the big positives. Some of the negatives and the cons are safety risks. Injuries, even minor injuries, could become serious if you're alone and far from help. You're more vulnerable in a wildlife encounter. You don't have the group noise and the group presence to deter that wildlife. Number two, you might feel some loneliness or isolation or boredom. So those extended periods, just feeling a little isolated, mainly maybe at night. Usually you'll get over that part pretty quick, in my case anyway. So, and then boredom. Without that interaction, you might be a little bit bored, might feel a little monotonous at times, but I find it quite peaceful. So each to their own on that one. Some people might not experience any loneliness or boredom, and that's just the way they want it. And number three, assistance, limited assistance or no assistance at all. So you are doing all of the tasks, the camp chores, which can take up a fair amount of time unless you have built in a kind of easy cooking, and more of a chill type of trip, but you're doing everything yourself. You're doing all the camp chores. You're doing all the wood processing, starting fires, the cooking, cleaning things up. It's all on you. And then the lack of backup. So in an emergency, you have nobody that is there immediately to help you. So that's one big thing. And then that goes into one of the tips is just having an emergency satellite communication device for those rare instances so you're prepped and prepared. Let's move on to tips for solo camping. And in that, number one, preparation and planning. You got to inform others. You have to let people know where you're going, the times, estimates, stuff like that, your expected return date, maybe a window. If you don't hear from me by this time, it's time to start looking, and have some emergency contacts in place and have a plan in place with them if they're not hearing back from you, what they can do. And then route familiarity, your trip, researching your route, having a good understanding of that terrain, potential hazards, doing your map study beforehand. I've talked about this in the prep and planning part of wilderness camping, but know where you're going and have a really good idea in your head without looking at a map of where you're going and what you need to do and where you need to be. Number two, packing essentials. I'll get into this a little bit, but first aid kit, you're going to tailor this kind of to your personal needs, and it needs to be comprehensive for yourself because you're going to be the only one. So you're kind of depending on that. Navigation tools, have maps downloaded on your phone on an app, have a map and compass, have some battery backups or a little solar charger to keep those things topped off. And then a lot of times with packing, when you're by yourself, you opt for lighter gear in general to reduce your load because you're carrying everything by yourself. You compact cooking gear, smaller cooking gear. A lot of times this is a good way, cooking wise, you could do dehydrated meals, freeze-dried meals. You could keep that super simple if you wanted to, but also it's a good time if you just have the extra time, and depending on what style of trip you're going to go on, maybe you want to spend some more time cooking. Maybe that's your jam. It would be a really good time to do that. You could cook whatever you want. You want to experiment with some different cooking. It's a good time to do that. Safety measures, number 3, for solo camping. Have check-in points. Plan check-in points along your route where you can update someone on your progress. Maybe you have self-service and you can just update people super easily that way. Or you have your satellite communication device where you can send a message or hit a simple check-in button that lets them know you're okay, sends your coordinates to them so that they have at least a last known location at a certain time. Some satellite communication devices like mine, I have a Zoleo, it will leave a nice breadcrumb trail that my wife can then look at online, and she gets notifications on that. So she knows exactly kind of where I have been with that breadcrumb trail, which is a really nice feature, and that's one of the reasons I went with that one. Bear canisters or bear resistant containers, or hang your food in a tree, in a bag or whatever. But using those bear canisters or the bear resistant bags or containers to store food is just going to help reduce the risk of attracting wildlife, not just bears, but any little critters that are going to get into your food. And then weather monitoring. This has been a big thing. This last spring so far in the Boundary Waters has been insane. Insane amount of rain, high water, fast moving water. And it's been an issue. There's been multiple deaths in the Boundary Waters so far this spring. And it's not easy to keep an eye on weather while you're up there either. But knowing what the weather is supposed to be, and then if you do some of these satellite communication devices, you can get weather updates on them, which is really nice. And that can save you a little bit too. But then just having a plan for those changes in weather, knowing what you're going to do, hunkering down, whatever it might be, seeking some sort of shelter in those cases, getting behind some big boulders, maybe protect you from downed trees and stuff like that. So a little bit on what to expect with solo camping. Personal growth is a big one. You're going to overcome some challenges. There might be a lot of fear leading up to a trip, and you're going to overcome that. The more nights you're out there and you're sleeping, the more comfortable you're going to get. Your body, you'll settle down a little bit. Your mind will settle down. That can take a couple nights though, but you're going to overcome that. And that in itself can lead to some personal growth, a stronger sense of achievement. And another thing to expect is just enhanced awareness. Your senses are going to heighten. You're going to be more aware of the subtle changes around you in the environment, which at night kind of sucks because it can keep you awake at night. But that's part of the experience. And after a couple nights, you kind of settle down. You get into a rhythm. It can take some time, but you'll learn a lot about yourself on these trips, and you'll have these challenges that you're going to overcome. And it can be a pretty rewarding and fun experience. Let's move on to group camping. The pros of group camping. Number one, you got that social interaction, the bonding experience, shared experiences, and enjoying nature together. It can help strengthen those bonds and creates those memories that you look back on and are like, that was a good trip, that was a good time. The entertainment, group activities, campfire stories, games, they all just add to it and enhance that experience. Number two, the shared responsibilities. You distribute tasks. You can learn things, skill sharing. You're learning things from other people. You can, become more educated. It's easier to learn new things from other people rather than having to get creative and figure it out yourself. Number three is just increased safety. That's a big one. You're in a group. You have that emergency support, so you have immediate assistance in case of injuries or illness or something like that. And it's a good wildlife deterrent. Having a bigger group, you're less likely to encounter bigger animals like a bear. And when you do, you have a bunch of people there, and usually that's a good thing for you. Now, the negatives to group camping is, number one, coordination and compromise. Planning becomes more complex. You have to coordinate schedules. You maybe have to coordinate gear and preferences. It can require pretty significant amount of effort and communication. And then there's pace and preferences. People have different fitness levels. They have different interests, comfort zones. Some people want to go on this trip that is a super long, physically demanding trip that's just like on the go. And another person might want to just go a little ways and hang out for 4 days and then come back. And then there's everything in between. But you got to figure that out, and that can sometimes be a bit of a pain. Number two, you got noise and distraction. When you're by yourself, it's quiet. It's not like you're talking out loud to yourself. Well, maybe you are a little bit, but nothing like just chit-chatting with with other people on your trip. So it does reduce that kind of nature immersion piece of it, but it can still be very peaceful even with the extra people. And then there's potential conflicts, differences in opinion, or maybe a personality clash arises, whatever it might be, but you figure it out. You figure it out because you have to. Number three, logistical challenges. Space, gear. More people means more gear and a little bit more intricate in the packing and transportation. And one of the biggest thing is food. Planning and cooking meals for a group sometimes sucks. It can be difficult, especially if people have certain dietary restrictions, so you can't do certain things. My son's allergic to egg. It's not a big deal for us, but we work our way around it. It's not a huge deal anymore. But you could have those food management things and planning meals for 5, 6 to 9 people on a trip or something can get a little daunting, especially if one person is doing the planning. But even just coordinating that planning is sometimes a hassle. Some tips though for these group trips. Oh, one thing too. Some people will go on a group trip, but it's like a solo combo group trip. Let's say they are going to the Boundary Waters. They both have their own solo canoes. They pack their own gear. They pack their own food. They do all that. They pack their own stuff. And maybe there's a couple items that they share, like maybe a tent, or maybe not even a tent. Sometimes maybe a tent. Maybe they share a tarp for over camp. And one person brings an axe, person brings a saw, stuff like that. But for the most part, they'll pack their own food, cook their own food, eat their own food, and they do all of that. So it's kind of like combining a solo trip, but now you're going with somebody. And so it's easier logistically speaking. You just have to coordinate a time and like meet there, and like they're in charge of their own gear and their own food. You're in charge of your gear and your food with a couple of shared items maybe for in and around camp. That's another great way to do it. Some tips: effective planning, maybe a role assignment. All right, this person's going to coordinate food. This person is going to reserve the permit and all that and kind of take the lead. This person's going to bring this gear. Have a group gear list so it gets shared to avoid some of the redundancies. Ensure that all the essential items get covered and that people don't bring, you're not doubling or tripling up on stuff where you're like, oh, I brought that too. Number 2, communication. A clear schedule or itinerary. It just ensures everybody's aware of the plan. And then have meeting points. Designate meeting points in case the group gets separated and planning that out. Number 3 is meal coordination. So meal planning, this is a big one. You're planning meals in advance. You consider what everybody wants, which can be a pain, but if you have maybe like a shared folder somewhere that you guys can look at and make a plan and do some bulk cooking, larger pots if you have them, shared cooking duties, somebody in charge of bringing some trail mix, somebody is in charge of bringing certain meat or something for a meal. I don't know, you guys figure that out, but coordinate the meals, coordinate snacks and what people want. And then number 4 is anything conflict resolution wise, just open communication, respect other people's opinions and what they want to do, but then also be flexible and willing to compromise and adapt so everyone enjoys the trip. And what to expect in a group trip: complexity, fun, laughter, shared jokes, stories, activities. It's going to be a more lively atmosphere than a solo trip. The collective effort part, shared tasks, experiences together. There's a little bit of sense of teamwork and camaraderie that comes with that. And then you have that support network, just a bunch of people doing the same trip. You shared experience makes challenges more manageable, and it can enhance that overall trip, that overall experience. Let's move on to some general camping tips. Safety. Have some first aid knowledge, just basic first aid to handle some of those potential injuries. Be aware of wildlife and be aware of weather and know what to do. Be prepared for those sudden changes, and then pack the appropriate gear and clothing for those conditions. When it comes to gear, tent, or shelter, just choosing a shelter that's going to work for you, or if it's with a group, coordinate. Do we all want to you sleep in the same tent? Do we all want our own sleeping areas? Are we all going to be in hammocks with a tarp shelter? Consider all of that stuff. Clothing, layering clothing, having good waterproof and windproof options, because whenever you camp, it seems like you always need a rain jacket or rain pants. And then lighting's a big one. Headlamps, lanterns, spare batteries. I like to bring little hat clips because I wear a hat most of the time, so a light clip right to the visor. And I have a couple of those, and they're rechargeable, actually, so they're pretty nice. And then I always leave no trace. Pack out what you pack in. That's pretty self-explanatory. So both of them can be super unique and rewarding in their own right. That solo camping is going to promote that self-reliance, that stronger connection with nature, and you're going to figure yourself out. And it's a lot of fun. Group camping, also a ton of fun. You get that social bond. You share responsibilities. You're out there as a group having a really good time. And that's really fun in its own right. And by understanding these kind of characteristics or the differences, right, you can prepare adequately. You can ensure that you're going to have fun no matter what you're doing, whether that's a solo trip or a group trip. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay wild. Thank you for sticking around. If you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating and review, even one word. It helps a ton. Sincerely appreciate you guys. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay wild.
You've been listening to Untamed, Unbroken, a Lone Pine Adventures original podcast.